Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Strangers and Aliens live video feed. I don't know what to call it. I'm just going to go with that because I haven't done this very much. I practiced it twice today, did a practice last week that didn't work very well. And so I'm hoping this works. But this is a video where I'm going to be talking about a brand new project that is going to be coming out next week. And by next week, I mean it's going to be the first week of December in 2023. So if you come across this video beyond that, this is still going to be informational information that you can be informed by. But for right now, this is actually kind of an announcement video that is going to be just kind of explaining the project, talking about where it came from, why we did it, and also doing a cover reveal. Kind of. I mean, cover reveals that I've seen, people have actually had the books in their hand, or they've done something special on Facebook where every day a little piece of paper comes away, like it's being unwrapped, like a gift that's being unwrapped over the course of 7 days or something like that. I'm not doing that. I'm just going to be showing you on my iPad here what it, what it looks like. But I'm very excited about this project. And so I wanted to make a video about it that we can share then to people. And I edited the project. It's an anthology. It's an anthology of 28 stories, and there's a lot of talent that showed up for this thing, and I'm very excited to let people know about it. I'm very excited for it to come out next week, first week of December here. Depends on when Amazon actually finalizes approving the files, and as soon as that happens, we'll let you know. But for right now, like I said, I want to describe the project. So who am I? I'm Ben Avery. I am a writer. I've been writing comic books for 2 decades now. I've been involved in podcasting for a decade and, well, yeah, a decade and a year or two. But I've been doing podcasting for a long time. So Strangers and Aliens, if you're watching this because you know about Strangers and Aliens, you know we have hundreds of episodes over at strangersandaliens.com where I like to talk about Christianity and science fiction, faith and fantasy, spirituality and creativity. I love those things and how they all mix together. And this project here that I'm getting ready to release next week is kind of another one of those times where this is kind of the synthesis of all these things and kind of bringing them all together into one. And so like I said, I've also been writing for a long time. I have written I wrote The Christ for the Kingdom Comics. I wrote Job for Kingdom Comics, or Kingstone Comics. I wrote a book called Kingdoms for Zondervan, a book called Time Flies, Armor Quest. I've worked with George R. Martin on his Hedge Knight series as a writer. I've worked with Randy Alcorn. I edited a graphic novel that he wrote, and I've been involved in comics for a long time, and I love comics, but I also love science fiction. And I love the text stories of science fiction as well. And so, that's how I started. In third grade, I wasn't writing comic books. I was drawing some, but I was writing the short stories because third grade, that's when I had Mrs. Barry, and she was the creative writing teacher who came in on Friday, and she did all the creative stuff that I loved so much, and she wasn't mean to me. And I also probably behaved better in her class, and so maybe that was a nicer thing too. Maybe that's why we got along. But anyway, we don't need to psychoanalyze my third grade teachers. What we do need to do is talk about this project. And so I've loved reading and writing ever since I've been able to read and write. And one of the things that I really love and have a lot of them in my collection of books is anthologies. And so, and I've done a couple comic book anthologies, but I've never been involved in written anthologies that are prose stories. But I was thinking about, like, why do I like anthologies? And a part of it is because you get a sampling of a bunch of different writers. This book right here, this is one of my favorite anthologies. I got this for $1 at the dollar store in Troy, Ohio, and I don't know what was going on with TSR and their fiction books, but this is Amazing Stories, and it's just a sampling of writing over the years from Amazing Stories, and I just loved this book. And this was a book where I was introduced to writers I had never heard of, and they weren't necessarily writers that I sought after that, but I had never heard of some of these writers. Isaac Asimov was involved. Of course, I had heard of him. But the stories go back to, like it says, it says 30 years or 60 years. But this is from the first story in here is from 1928. And so it was just a nice sampling of just science fiction over the years. Another anthology that I love that I just talked about in a recent video is this anthology that was edited by Roger Elwood, and just it's 4 volumes, and each writer wrote a different story for each volume, and this is just a special collection. I love this anthology. But as I was working on Ghosts of the Future, my novel Ghosts of the Future, I started thinking about like what are some other things that I could do that would be able to expand things out a little bit, and what would fit the mission of Strangers and Aliens, because another mission for Strangers and Aliens is to get things out in front of people. That's why I'm doing the Is It Worth Reading videos on the Strangers and Aliens YouTube channel. Is to talk about science fiction written by Christians that might get a bad rap just because it's a science fiction book written by Christians. And so as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about anthologies, and I had an idea for an anthology. And the idea was very, very simple. The execution, a little bit less so, but the idea was to take Ecclesiastes 3 and do a time travel story about each one of the times, where it talks about for every season, there is a purpose and a time for every season under heaven. And so it's a time to heal and a time to kill, and it's a time to love and a time to hate, and the song by the Birds. And to actually then recruit people to come on, 28 different people to do 28 different short stories that are about 28 different takes on time travel, and with the theme being that key word: time to love, time to hate, time for war, time for peace. Now, I did expand it a little bit, and when I actually started pitching it to people, I stopped pitching it so much as just time travel, but started pitching it as a science fiction or fantasy application of the manipulation of time. So it does mean that there are some stories where we don't have people who are going through time, and, backwards or forward through time, but there are people who are slowing down time, and there are people who are stealing time, and there's just things like that that just allow the writers to use their imagination beyond just, hey, we're going to do time travel. But and even my story is not about actual time travel. It's about some. I'm not going to say what it's about because I want you to read it. So yeah, so that's kind of what it is. But one of the ways I would describe this collection, honestly, is as it's like the Twilight Zone, because in the Twilight Zone you have it's an anthology TV show, and sometimes it's 3 guys on a spaceship flying through space and dealing with some sort of situation. And sometimes it's about a lady in her living room dealing with some sort of weird creature. And sometimes it's about a family just, getting through their day, and they're getting through their day with their son who can make anyone do anything and has superpowers. And so as I was looking at this and kind of doing the final edits on this, it just struck me some of the stories felt very Twilight Zone-ish or Twilight Zone-esque, whatever. It felt like it came from a Twilight Zone concept, and others felt more hard sci-fi or high fantasy. But then when you take all these things and put them together, that does kind of equal a Twilight Zone style of thing, where it's just very, very broad range of fantastic literature. And so I just I I keep using the word excited, but I'm very excited for this project. We're finally wrapping it up, and I can't wait for people to be able to experience these stories that I've been living with and working with these writers with for months and months right now. This is kind of the culmination of something we started before the summer. So who is in this project? I'm trying to decide. Do I go ahead and read all 28 names? I think I need to, because I don't want to leave anyone out. But on the flip side of that, there are 28 names here. And some of these are people that I know. Some of these people that I know well. Steve McDonald from Strangers and Aliens. Evan David from Strangers and Aliens. Nathan Marchand, who has been a guest host on Strangers and Aliens a number of times. Are all names you may be familiar with. But then there's a lot of other names on here that you might be familiar with because I've talked about them or had them on, an episode once or twice. So I'm just going to go ahead and quickly talk through just who did the stories, what stories they did. But there is a story, it's a Time to Be Born, is by Parker J. Cole, who was, in my opinion, a real get for this. She would say I was crazy to even ask her to be a part of this, but She's one that I went to directly and said, "Hey, would you be interested in being a part of this?" Because she has a wide body of work. She is primarily a romance writer, which is why she said that it was crazy for me to ask her. But that's also another reason why I thought this is a good idea to ask her, is because it brings in another perspective. And she's a Star Trek fan. I mean, come on, this is someone, she knows her stuff when it comes to sci-fi. She just doesn't write a lot of it, and so I was able to give her a chance to do that. And Time to Die is written by Robert Mullen. A Time to Plant is written by Branson Boykin. A Time to Uproot is by A.C. Peckham. A Time to Kill is by Evan David from Strangers and Aliens. A Time to Heal, Kathleen Bird. A Time to Tear Down, Stephen S. Seal. A Time to Build, Dana Bell. A Time to Weep, Jared Gehring. A Time to Laugh, T.W. Clausen. A Time to Mourn, Adam David Collins, who I've had on the podcast before. Well, no, I don't think I've had him on my Strangers and Aliens podcast. It was on Up from the Ashes. But I've talked about him here because he wrote not Flight of the Angels. He wrote, oh, I can't, I'm blanking on the book that he wrote, but he wrote the book that's about the space liner that's carrying a whole bunch of passengers that gets caught in the middle of an interstellar war. I'm just going to move on. Sorry, Adam. I completely blanked on that. A Time to Dance by Nathan Marchand, who is, you're aware of him if you're familiar with the podcast. A Time to Cast Away Stones by Stephen McDonald, who you'll be aware of if you're aware of the podcast. A Time to Gather Stones Together by Reggie Broach. A Time to Embrace by Kalina Radcliffe. A Time to Refrain from Embracing by Michael S. Poteet, who is someone from long ago. He was on a Strangers and Aliens episode a long, long time ago. But he's been a good friend for a long time. A Time to Search by Alan and Aaron Rainey. A Time to Give Up by S.N. Montoya. A Time to Keep by Teddy Deppner. A Time to Let Go by Ari Lewis. A Time to Tear by Sarah L. France. A Time to Mend by S.M. Schuster. A Time to Be Silent by Sammy. A Time to Speak by Joshua Reed. A Time to Love by Kathy McCrum. A Time to Hate by Ben Avery. A Time for War by J.J. Johnson. And A Time for Peace by Liz Deppner. And I do apologize if I said any of your names wrong. I didn't think to ask about that before I started the video. So one of the interesting things about this is, like I said, there's people connected to the podcast, but there's also two sets of parent-child writers. There's Liz Deppner and Teddy Deppner, her mother. They did two separate stories. And then there's Alan and Aaron Rainey, who are father and son writing duo, who wrote one story together. And they also wrote The Flight of the Angels, which is, they came on the podcast, I mean, maybe 10 years ago to talk about that with us, but they were there early on with Strangers and Aliens. So that's who was in it. When is it going to be available? It will be available first week of December 2023. I'm shooting for the Thursday. It might be earlier than that. Who knows? We'll see. We'll let you know for sure. If whoever shared this video with you, watch their space, because they'll let you know about it, or watch Strangers and Aliens Facebook page or Onward and Upward Media Facebook page, and you'll hear about it there, or Ben Avery Storyteller Facebook page. But if someone shared this video with you so that you could learn about, like, what is this that we're working on here, you definitely just follow them. They will let you know, and we'll give you those details. The cover price will be $17.99. And you might say, wow, that's a pretty expensive paperback. Yes and no. This is a 530 odd pages book. I mean, this is huge. And part of it's 28 stories. The next anthologies, and I have 3 more anthologies planned after this. And I'm going to be recruiting people from this group and recruiting people from outside of this group. So if you're interested, follow me at Onward and Upward Media Facebook. But when we do the next one, it's going to be shorter. It's going to be a smaller project with fewer stories. I did not know what I was getting myself into for my first anthology here when I was going with 28 stories. But on the other hand, I'm glad I did. I mean, there's some good stuff here. There's some really good stuff here. There's high adventure as far as like fantasy goes. There's mythological elements. There are science fiction elements as far as, spaceships and that kind of thing. But then there's also just that domestic sci-fi that I kind of enjoy. I coined that phrase when I read Winter Flight last summer. And but that domestic sci-fi where it's people just living their life and, It's the kind of thing that it's a sci-fi story set in a living room, or in one of our stories cases, it's a sci-fi story set on a chicken farm, and a lot of the action takes place in a chicken coop. I mean, but it's a great story. It's a great story. So, with all that said, I am going to do the cover reveal now. And so, the cover reveal is going to be me just showing it to you on my iPad. But here is the cover of A Time for Everything. And wow, does that look great with the reflection of my computer? I didn't think this through really. So, I'm gonna. Here is the full the full cover with the back cover. Wow, this could have there's me. Oh, it's Inception now. Look at that. Oh, okay. Well, you can go to the Facebook page as well, and you'll be able to see the cover there. And I know that a lot of the writers who are a part of this project have been very excited about me to do this video, not because they're excited to see this mug. They're excited because they now can share that cover. It will be available on Amazon and then on a number of these writers' web pages directly. You'll be able to order directly from them as they are getting the copies. So, yeah, that's that. That is A Time for Everything, and I'm so excited because, and I wrote about this in the introduction to the anthology, but that passage in Ecclesiastes is so interesting because it says there's a time for everything, and then it says there's a time to be born and a time to die. And just in that first line, it's just this broad statement, birth to death. And then in the 13 lines that follow after that, there's all these couplets where it's just these things that are just a part of that. In between point A and point B, we have a time to love and a time to hate and a time to gather and a time to cast away. And there's these elements that is just brought to stark reality in this short poem. And that was what I was hoping for in doing this anthology, is to be able to have this kind of breadth of theme where it's just about life, which is what science fiction is good for. Science fiction is great about taking imaginary things like the stuff on the wall behind me, but then making a statement about reality. And that's what happens in this book. And that's what happens 28 different times in this book. I'm very, very excited. I'm very, very thankful to the people who trusted me to do this and who took the time to write their stories. Some are short, some are long. I mean, there's one that probably we consider a novella, not a short story. But you know what? Rules are made to be broken, and I made the rules, so I let them be broken. So, all that said, thank you, writers, for doing this, and thank you, watchers, viewers, listeners, for spending time with me as I talk about this. And until next time, I just want to say, as you go about your life and as you go through these different times of life, first of all, remember you're not going through these times of life alone. The good times, the bad times, you're not alone. God is with you. He loves you. He cares about you. He sees you. But I also want to say, as you go through all that, Godspeed.